Betty's Lab.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another Betty's Lab video. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't so. Together we can make this channel grow. Today I will be covering the basics in order how to solder properly. I'm an electrical engineer and in my study I see a lot of people who cannot solder. So first we're gonna start with the basic, the environment. So the setup that's required in order to solder safely and correctly. Start with the working surface. You need something which is not flammable, which cannot burn. So in this case, this piece of tile. You can also use a piece of glass. Really important that it is heat resistant. Second, you need a very sturdy soldering iron base. Something that can hold your iron firmly and with knocking will not fall over, will not cause any fires or burns. Really important. You can use a spring if you want to. You can just place your soldering iron in the spring so it has some flex and then attach the base of the spring to something heavy. That's a poor man's soldering holder, but it works and it's safe. So keep that in mind. Third, really important, cleaning of the soldering iron. So I'm using a damp sponge, a wet sponge, really easy to clean, but it will induce a little bit of thermal shock. So whenever you put the iron in there or wipe the iron against the sponge, it will lose a little bit of temperature. So in order to go back soldering again, you need to wait a little bit. But I can tell you it's fine. But it's one of the easiest way. It's really cheap also to replace the sponges. Most important thing, fourth thing, is smoke absorption. Mine soldering station has a built-in smoke extractor, so really close to the tip, it will actually suck away the smoke. If you don't have that, please make something yourself with a computer fan and a piece of activated charcoal. So the computer case fan or something like that will basically suck the smoke and push it into an activated carbon sheet in order to neutralize the flux, because you don't want to get that stuff in your lungs. What you can also do is solder in a ventilated area, so outside or somewhere, but keep in mind that the fumes are not good for you. So now we're going to move to the auxiliary tools that are needed in order to solder properly. Okay, now for the auxiliary tools needed in order to solder. Most important, solder itself. This is a 40-60 blend, so it means it has 60% lead, 40% tin, and this will reduce the melting temperature. So you can work at lower temperatures. Lower temperatures means less oxidation during the soldering process, so it's easier to solder. This stuff also has a rosin core, so it's basically a mild flux, something that prevents the oxidation inside the solder, and that really helps during the soldering process. If you don't have the rosin inside, you can always use additional flux, which is this stuff. It usually comes in a bottle or a syringe. This is like a pasty stuff. You can also get a liquid stuff. And make sure you wear gloves handling this stuff, because it's not good for your skin and for your health. Also make sure you get the no clean variant, because there are some fluxes that can actually corrode away the contacts whenever you don't clean the flux of the contacts. Make sure you always clean them, but I will explain that later as well. Finally, the last thing you can use is this little bit of wire. This is called solder wick, and this is basically a braided piece of copper, and you can use that to remove excess solder from joints, from bridges that you accidentally made. So this stuff is really nice to have, and it's called solder braid. Now with the basic auxiliary tools needed for soldering, we're gonna go into actually soldering a joint properly, and we're gonna start on a PCB. Okay, here we are looking at a perf board or ProtoBoard surface. We're going to heat up the iron to 330 degrees Celsius, or if your iron goes higher than that or has a fixed temperature, 350 is also fine. As you can see, the tip is not clean, so we're going to do that first. So we spoke about the sponge. Whenever the iron is heated up, just going to gently clean it into the sponge. Like this, and you can see nice, shiny, clean tip. This soldering iron has a conically shaped tip, and it's better to use a chisel shaped one. However, usually your soldering iron will come with a conically shaped one. I don't know why they do it, but it's fine. You can just use the side of your conically shaped tip in order to transfer enough heat into a pad. It's fine. So what you do, most of the people just touch the solder onto the soldering iron, and this is a really bad thing to do because you saw the smoke, and that's basically your rosin gone. So if you place it onto the joint, you're gonna heat it up, and then realize nothing happens because you create a slight oxidation layer, and that basically prevents the solder from flowing properly. Also, if you add a little bit of solder onto the iron, whenever you hold it down on the pad, you create a heat bridge. So this heat bridge will be established, and as you can see, together with the rosin, it kind of like sticks naturally to the pad. I know this looks horrible because this is just a demonstration. So okay, clean the iron again. Clean iron. Placing soldering iron onto the pad. Touch it a little bit. Wait, and then touch the pad itself. Boom. Again. Boom. Boom. So touch the soldering iron a little bit, touch the pad, boom. So it's really important that you touch the pad with the solder after touching the soldering iron, and not touch the soldering iron. This will not work. So it's really important that you touch the pad, touch the soldering iron really quick, prevent the oxidation, touch the pad, boom. And make sure you keep your soldering iron a little bit longer on the pad, and then firstly remove the soldering wire and then remove the iron, because then basically you will finalize the joint. So that's really important. Okay, now I will actually put a component through the holes and solder the component properly on there. Okay, now we have a component stuck through the holes. What we can do is use some tweezers to basically bend the wires aside, and this will kind of prevent your part from falling out. So this is like a small advice in order to keep through-hole components in place. Again, clean your soldering iron on the sponge. Clean iron. It's really hard to see through this screen. Place your soldering tip on there. Touch it briefly with the solder, then touch the pad. Lift away the solder, lift away the iron. Perfect joint. It's really hard to see. Touch the iron real quick, touch the pad, boom, done. No bridges, no hassle, clean joint. So that's basically it. What people usually do is what I showed before, is touch the solder onto the soldering iron, let the flux boil away, touch the pads. It's not painting. So this will not transfer the solder, or at least not very properly. Or you can burn the pads, score the pads. Soldering itself should be a very quick and easy 2-3 seconds, and then have a joint. So if the flux boiled away, then basically you're done. You need to add more flux or add more solder with flux. So now I'm going to demonstrate you a small example with the flux. So as you can see, we have a very grayish blob of solder on the tip, and now we're going to apply some extra flux. Okay, so you add some extra flux, a little bit. Get the soldering iron in there. And previously we saw that this didn't work, but now if we touch the solder, the flux, the pad with the flux on there, you see, it basically works. Because the added flux to the pads, I'm gonna do a couple more. Prevents the oxidation, spreads the solder around, and creates nicely thin pads. So it's fine whenever the flux in your solder boils off, but then before you're gonna solder something again, you need to add more flux in terms of extra flux that you can buy in those syringes. Really important. Another important trick is whenever you put the soldering iron away for storage or for longer periods when you don't use it, please make sure you add some solder on the tip. So like a small blob is enough. This looks really silly, but it actually prevents the tip from degrading as fast. And the moment you take the tip out of the holder, heat it up, wipe it clean, it's gonna shine, it's gonna work. So it's just to extend your tip life of your soldering iron. And some tips are really cheap because they are replaceable. These are like entire cartridges that I use, so I need to buy an entire cartridge, and those are like 25 euros, 30 euros compared to the 5 euros that a replaceable tip costs. So keep that in mind. It's like a small tip. No pun intended. Okay, now we're gonna actually tin plate a piece of copper wire. And now you might wonder, well, you have two hands and you need to hold your solder, grab your soldering iron and also hold a piece of wire. I mean, you could use a vise or something and place the wire in there, but I'm gonna show you a neat little trick. So you bend kind of like an L shape from your tin alloy. Then you grab your wire, so you can basically place it on the piece of bent up tin alloy. Okay, you see the blob here, wipe it off. You can place your soldering iron on top of your wire, start at the very tip of the wire so you don't burn the insulation, and then basically lower the entire construction onto the tin. And then go back and forth, and then wipe off to the front, and then you have a perfectly tinned wire without using a vise or anything. Make sure that you don't have your hands too close because you can burn yourself, of course, if you hold it too close. But basically in this method you don't need a third hand. Really, really nice trick. Okay, now we're gonna solder the piece of wire to this piece of ProtoBoard. So what I'm gonna do is another trick. You apply some flux to a few pads. You have your soldering tip here. You add some solder to the tip. And then you see all your precious flux boil off, but that's fine because you have flux on the PCB. Then you have your piece of tinned wire, so no bare copper but tinned wire. Place it on the pads and then gently press down. And then you see the solder from your tip flow into the pad. It's that simple. Wire is fixed. You can also do the back of the wire, but probably the front will come loose or something like that. But you get the general idea. So you can use the flux as basically your third hand. So you can have a little bit of solder on the tip, flux boiled away, but you add additional flux so you can still use that blob of solder in order to get a proper joint. So as you can see, heat it up a little bit, boom. Always wait, you can always blow a little bit on the joint, so a gentle breeze of air will basically solidify it faster. Make sure you don't move anything before everything is completely solidified, so wait 5 seconds or 8 seconds or something. in order to have a proper joint, so this is not coming off there. Okay, now we're going to use the desoldering braid or the solder wick. We apply a little bit of flux to the component that we soldered previously, and then we're gonna place the wick on its side against the lead. Hold the soldering iron tip sideways because we have conical shape, we want to make as much contact as possible. Hold it against there and basically wait for the solder to wick into the wick. And as you can see, the wick is stuck now, so don't pull on it, just heat it a little bit more and then remove the wick and the soldering iron together. So one lead is free. Now we're going to do the other side. Clean bit of wick, sideways, push it in there. Wait, push it in there, and then remove both of them. And now the component is loose. Okay, another quick advice. Whenever you have used a bit of the soldering wick, whenever it's saturated, just snip it off. Start with a clean bit of wick. As tempting as it might seem, whenever you have a couple of pads that you cleaned off, so like this, clean it off, never drag the wick around. Just gently lift it off. This, like this. Never drag the wick around because you can basically try to like rub off the pads, and that's not a good thing. Just heating, waiting, a little bit of flux, then gently lift off. If the wick doesn't come off, remove the iron, wait a little bit, then add a little bit of heat again, and then repeat over. Never pull the wick off because you're gonna rip off the pad. Okay, now we're gonna solder two pieces of wire together. What I did in my younger days was basically braid the two pieces of wire together. Of course you could do this, it's perfectly fine, but what I nowadays do is apply a little bit of flux to one wire. Basically have a little blob of solder on the tip, just like on the pad, and then basically touch the joint. Move it a little bit back and forth, move it to the sides, wait, and you have a perfectly nice joint. You can see a little spike here. I had too much solder on the tip, but this is fine. I mean, you can just brush it off a little bit, like that, and you have a perfectly working joint. Now it would be wise, we soldered all those joints, to clean the joints with isopropyl alcohol. And just a brush in order to get the flux off, so they are not sticky anymore. Note that I also am not wearing any gloves. You should wear gloves. It's important that you don't get this stuff on your hands. But it's always a wise thing to clean off the flux, especially from the PCBs. You see all those very nasty, like sticky bits here, and here, and here. Make sure you clean that off with a brush and some isopropyl. Okay, now for cleaning of the joints, use a little bit of IPA, isopropyl, and a Q-tip. And basically clean off the residue. No pun intended. For the somewhat harder to reach spots, you can use a small brush. But be aware that this brush will not actually like suck up the residue. And this will actually suck up the residue because it's gonna be sucked into the cotton itself. So for this, sometimes you need an additional tissue or something to wipe it off, but you can just clean the hard to reach area with this. So I hope you will do something with this advice and these tips. As you can see, you don't need a lot of equipment in order to make a good solder joint. The most important thing is the flux in order to prevent the oxidation and in order to help the solder flow properly into the joint. I hope you learned something, and as always,
thanks for watching, and remember, just try to DIY.